Back with you on Hittin Hard with Jon Chuckery here on Locked On Sports Atlanta. We ask you to head over to youtube.com and find Locked On Sports Atlanta. Put it in your browser, search us, subscribe to our YouTube channel, be a part of the community, leave us a comment there. Of course, we are also free and available on all of your favorite podcast platforms, including Spotify, Odyssey. You can always find us free and available on any of your platforms, and follow me on my personal Twitter page at JMCH316. Elite, 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 right? We talk about that word all the time. But the reality is in the NFL, you have to have elite players. You have to have game-wrecking difference makers. You know, it's good to have some role players in the NFL, but you have to have top-tier guys. You have to have guys that grade out really high, perform at a high level, and are some of the best of the best of the best of the best, to quote Will Smith, at their position. So when we talk about this, I've said for years that when you get into the NFL draft, I don't care necessarily about how many starters you get. I don't care about quantity. Tell me about quality. And the thing about the Falcons is right now, they don't have the quality players. They don't have enough of high caliber players. Yeah, we got 4 guys that can start. Cool. Are they any good? Jalen Mayfield's a starter, except that he's the worst interior pass blocking offensive lineman in the entire of the NFL. He's a starter, right? But is he a quality starter? And that's what I look at. So, and this is very subjective, okay? So I don't really care if it's 1 or 2 more, 1 or 2 less, but I think that this is somewhat fairly accurate. I was going through the rosters of other teams in the NFC South, okay? And let's face it, the Panthers are not a very good franchise right now. The Saints are in a lot of flux and transition. When we talk about elite players, they just lost an elite player, last season when Drew Brees retired, right? So they're a roster that's sort of in flux. And Tampa Bay is a couple of years removed from a Super Bowl team, and they did bring several of their guys back. So I went through and I looked and I tagged what I thought were the number of elite players, guys that, and this is subjective because, for instance, I'm going to tell you, I put Christian McCaffrey in the elite status. Now, is he been elite in the last year or two because of injury and things like that? No, but there's no doubt that he has the ability to be an elite level player, and he has been an elite level player. And he's not so far removed from being elite that you keep him out of the discussion. Same thing with Michael Thomas in New Orleans. He's still an elite wide receiver. Yes, hurt and sitting out and this, that. I get it, but his talent is elite level. Okay, with all due respect to the Falcons, there's not a pass catcher on their roster that's better than Michael Thomas. Okay, now whether he's got his head right, those are all separate discussions. But for the purposes of what I'm talking about, let's look at elite level players that these rosters have. So I gave the Saints 6 guys. Okay, and again, without getting into who they are and this and the other, I went through and did a rough count that I think that there are 6 elite level players, whether that's Ryan Ramczyk, Michael Thomas, Lattimore, okay, guys like that. I think that there are 6 guys on the New Orleans Saints. On the Carolina Panthers, I think that there are 5 guys. You look at their defensive line and their linebacking core, I think DJ Moore is right there. DJ Moore is a tremendous wide receiver who, when you figure how bad his quarterback play is, when I say bad, I'm substituting that for the word god-awful, dreadful, with Sam Darnold and Cam Newton and the guys they've trotted out there the last couple of years. Teddy Bridgewater, for God's sakes. The fact that this guy's a 1,400-yard wide receiver in the league with that tells you about how good that he is. I don't care where he grades out. He's an elite level type of wide receiver. The Buccaneers, well, that's a whole nother matter. I gave them 8 guys, and maybe I'm being undervalued because I'm not even sure if I put Vita Vea in there or not, and I don't know how many guys you. Yeah, but obviously there are some no-brainers. Mike Evans is an elite level player. Tom Brady is the greatest player in the history of the NFL, the single most important player in the history of the NFL, right? When I look at how many players that the Falcons have that I think are elite or could be in that category, I've got 3, and that's AJ Terrell, Pitts, and Grady. I think that's the only guys right now that you could make some kind of argument for. Are they elite? Okay. Now, who are the next guys that could become elite? I always talk about, look at the Bucs roster, for instance. Okay. A couple of years ago, in the draft when Brady first got there, whatever it's been now, 3 years ago when Brady first got there. Their first 2 draft picks, they traded up one spot. They traded with San Francisco, swapped picks, literally just swapped picks with the 49ers, and they drafted Tristan Wirfs. Is Tristan Wirfs elite? Well, let me see. First team all rookie in his first year, first team all NFL in his second year. You're damn right he's elite, and he's as good an offensive lineman as there is in the NFL. And then in the second round, they drafted Antoine Winfield. Antoine Winfield is a magnificent player. He's an elite caliber player. Don't get it twisted. He's as good a safety as there is in the handful of guys that are left as safeties in the NFL. Winfield is right up there with anybody. That's 2 guys that they drafted. Okay. So maybe after a year or so, maybe they weren't exactly elite, but these guys within a couple of years became elite players. Who's next for the Atlanta Falcons? Because if the Falcons are going to get back to where we think they need to be, you have to find elite players. I think the next guy is Chris Lindstrom. And I'm going to argue this to the day that Lindstrom retires. Lindstrom is the most undervalued, underappreciated guy on the Falcons roster. The fact that he gave up no sacks and played as well as he did and was one of the top 4 graded offensive line guards, I should say, in the league with 2 slugs next to him. When you put McGarry and Hennessy and you stand 2, pinto bean, tomato can guys next to him, and the fact that Lindstrom is as good as he is, he's not nearly thought about well enough, around some of the league circles and stuff, because it's easy to look at him and say, well, the offensive line is so bad. Oh, but Lindstrom's pretty good, I guess. But he's, to quote my friend Hugh Douglas, well, he's good amongst a bunch of bad guys. Okay. You can still be elite and be amongst a bunch of bad guys. Okay. He's not a guy that you're saying is the nicest guy on death row. Okay. So I think Lindstrom has a chance to be elite. Could Arnold Ebiketie become elite for this team? If he can, think about how good Grady Jarrett and some of these other guys have the chance to be. So I think he's a candidate to be a guy who can become elite. Drake London is going to have to be a guy that becomes elite. You can't draft a guy that high at number 8 and not have him become an elite level type of player. And again, we can talk about quarterback and this, then, and the other, but I'll point you back to DJ Moore and how productive he is for the Carolina Panthers offense with all the, vagabond interloping quarterbacks that he's got over these last few years. So Drake London has to become elite. If this team is good, you invested way too high in your pass catching group to not have one of those other guys become elite. After that, I don't know. And see, that's the problem is I look at this roster and I say, how much better and how much room for growth do some of these guys have? Now, when I say Ebiketie and Drake London, that's 2 rookies this year. That's your first 2 draft picks in this draft. Are they elite yet? Of course not. They haven't stepped on one football field, made one single play or whatever like that. But you need those guys to become elite. And I do think that they have the capabilities. But outside of Chris Lindstrom, who do you look at on this roster and say, okay, that's an elite level guy? Casey Hayward's an aging quarterback. He's not elite. I love Jalen Hawkins and I love Richie Grant. I don't know enough to tell you that they have the elite level status in them. I love Michael Walker. I like the Troy Anderson pick, and okay, I'm fine with Carter and Rashaan Evans and those guys. I don't know that they have that elite level in them yet. I certainly know Taquan Graham, Marlon Davidson haven't done anything to show me that they're ready to be elite yet. Offensive line, does anybody get confused about Mayfield, Hennessy, and McGarry? I don't think any of those guys have eliteness in them. So you better hope that your first 2 draft picks this year become elite level players, because outside of Chris Lindstrom, there aren't a lot of other good options on this roster to start putting in that elite category. And that's the thing the Falcons have to get. They have to find more guys who are at the top of the food chain at their positions in this league. All right, when we come back, expectations for the Braves and Mets over a 13-game stretch that we told you started yesterday. Talk about that next. Hitting Hard with Jon Chuckery on Locked On Sports Atlanta.